Thanks for coming out tonight. Welcome to UX+Data. I'm Kim Moy. I'm one of the organizers of UX+Data. I'm a product designer at Capital One, and I also teach at Columbia with Matthew Weber, who's one of our co-organizers. He couldn't be here tonight, but he's a VP of product at Development Guild, which is a consulting firm for philanthropies. We also have Bill Prickett, who runs our video in the back there. So if you ever miss an event, you can catch a video of it online afterward. So we have a great talk for you all tonight. So please welcome Paige Whitmore.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. I began my career as a visual artist, and at some point I decided I was extremely interested in problem solving. So professionally, I became a designer. I approach design with the training, mentality, and methodologies of an artist, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. In terms of what the work does in the world, art and design have different high-level goals. Art asks questions that are meant to inspire more questions. Design asks questions in order to solve people's problems. Yet, art and design share similar processes. Both disciplines start with people and culture to form narratives and engage their audiences in experiential journeys. Artists deal in images that stand in for and evoke other things. Designers need to be able to read the interdependencies between symbols in a landscape of human and business needs. In planning a new piece, a painter understands that building the piece in a software program will produce an entirely different work with different resonance and different references than the hand-rendered version. A UX designer understands that a product prototyped in code will be functionally and strategically different than one prototyped using static comps. Both practitioners know they have to match the method of production with their collaborators' needs and with the public's needs. Artists collect and generate qualitative research to support our aesthetic arguments in art world and scholarly writing. Designers collect and generate research to defend our product decisions and recommendations to stakeholders. In situating the work in the trajectory of art historical and contemporary art conversation, artists create a basis of understanding, interpretation, and conversation around our individual studio practices. We ask, what is this work doing within the established conversation? Will I defy that convention? And if so, how and why? For what aim? Designers must honor UI conventions people are accustomed to for certain types of actions and change things in ways that improve the experience but minimize the cognitive load of new learning. We ask, what do people expect to have happen next? How can we make this new thing we're asking people to do seem like an obvious extension of what they already do here? Both types of work must be subservient to their larger purpose in a system of exchange. In school, frequent public critiques that tear the work to shreds, in a good way, teach artists to be completely unattached to anything we make while getting the work to greatness. The work is destined to occupy a particular product position in the art market. That's the ideal, if one is lucky. For designers, the ideal is a zero lack of attachment to designs during the iteration process. And if something we made turns out to actually be a bad solution, we don't take it personally because we have 17 other sketched ideas that could also solve the problem. Sketching is foundational to iteration in both disciplines. Artists know how to think through ideas quickly by sketching. We rely on flexible, non-precious drawing forms to, while ideating. Anyone could come into the studio, talk about a piece with us, and show us a way to make it better at accomplishing its goal. On product teams, sketching a prototype is faster than coding it, and more democratic. Anyone on a team can change a prototype on a whiteboard. An office manager, a product owner, a client. Good design ideas come from everyone, not just from designers. There are no rarefied technology skills needed to sketch. And as long as it correctly communicates its idea, a sketch can be super ugly, and that's okay. Artists also make a lot of ugly sketches. So now we're going to talk about data. Artwork doesn't spring to life out of thin air. Artists working today don't look at a blank canvas, pick the brightest color, and go for it. We hone in on particular social and cultural phenomena, then focus our image research on a thesis in order to create physical mini universes of meaning that reflect our take on what's happening in the world around us. There's a specific conceptual thesis to investigate and an aesthetic argument to make. So just as humans would die without food, artists need fodder for the work. To produce a body of work, we constantly collect and classify individual data points in the form of JPEGs and GIFs. Artists depend on carefully tended archives, years in the making, as much as we do on tools and physical making processes like paint and canvas. We organize the visual data we need in our toolkits by maintaining files of images organized by category, a practice long embraced by library scientists known as archiving, and incidentally another UX gateway career. Here I've classified 250 images from my own artist archive, specific to a particular body of work, into broad categories based on my interests. These high-level categories have subcategories. So for the high-level category of things I call confounding symbols, we see the subcategories nested underneath, which includes collections of images of toupees and images of party hats, among other confounding symbols. When I assign an image to one of these subcategories, there are often additional relationships between images in both the broad high-level categories and in the subcategories. A connection between two or more images could be based on anything I think is important, or could be important. I want to codify and build on those relationships. I don't want to flatten or lose the significance of those connections by isolating images into folders with other images that they are most obviously connected to. I want a way to acknowledge the tenuous, the unseemly, the slippery connections, because those are foundational for breaking new ground. So I allow myself to simultaneously classify images like an information architect and to think between categories, which is more like what we think of as an artistic tendency. In addition to my Google Drive hierarchy, I store a duplicate version of my archive in Google Photos, so I can scroll through all of it in uncategorized mode and hunt for relationships. For instance, here I spot a visual pattern parallel between the camouflage-clad veteran on the left doing yoga in Warrior 2 and the marble used in the modernist lobby interior on the right. I use the tagging system in Google Photos to help me map and track those relationships between images that I've classified into different folders. I might tag both images green all over patterning. So folders become about fundamental identity and tags note attributes. In Google Drive, I have a folder of images of graph paper, a folder of images of predator drones, and a folder of images of solar panels. I found a JPEG of a predator drone that happens to have a graph paper background. It's more appropriate for this image to live in a folder with the other predator drones than it is to live with the graph paper, because as a thing, it's more a drone than it is an example of graph paper. So I store it with the other drones, but I remain very interested in the fact that the drone is on a graph paper background. I'm also struck by the pattern on this solar panel, which has a visual relationship to graph paper through its grid. So I file the drone with the other drones and the solar panel with the other solar panels, but I tag both to graph paper. Later, when I search graph paper in my Google Photo Archive, I prompt myself to think about these tangential relationships to graph paper, as well as the more obvious images. And I'm reminded of that connection that I found before. So, of my 250 images, I know how many live in each subcategory. I can visually quantify this. I can see how interested I am in each type of thing, or at least how many images I have of each type of thing, which that may not always be the same thing. So informationally speaking, this is a spreadsheet. Each black dot on the outermost ring represents a single image file. The highest level categories live on the outermost ring of color, and their sizes are proportionally representative of their quantity within the set of 250. The subcategories live on the innermost ring. Using arcs, it is possible to indicate the connections between the groups. The color indicates the direction of influence. One color means a unidirectional influence, and two colors, as you see here, means a bidirectional relationship. As interaction designers, information architects, and visual designers, we can voraciously take in inspiration, as artists do. I believe this is crucial for pushing our practice forward. Slight tweaks and departures from established patterns prove to the people we serve, our users, that we are listening and watching and fascinated by the challenge of offering them something they truly want and need today. These micro tweaks and micro innovations are crucial for ensuring long-term product desirability and relevance. As designers, we can empower ourselves by creating libraries of interaction patterns to be inspired by and skeptical of, just as artists do. The motivation to engage in this practice is intrinsic, and there's no deadline for it. There's no boss that's going to ask you for this, probably. It's something that we can do to take care of ourselves as designers and to ensure that we stay inspired and motivated in our everyday work. So imagine for a minute that maybe you work as a product manager or a designer for a robo-taxi company, and you're on vacation in Singapore. And while you're there, maybe you see an architectural rendering of a proposal for futuristic pod single-person rail transport and a small-scale autonomous van driving around, working out its early kinks. Maybe you take a picture of the rail pod brochure sitting in your hotel lobby and a picture of the van as you pass it on the street. So those photos are living in your phone. Perhaps there's some specific feature or innovation you want to document and use later. Or maybe you just have a feeling that these things you're seeing could be important to your company, even if you don't quite know why. I would encourage everyone in this room to trust those hunches. Even if you're not sure why something matters, if you're struck by it, document it, classify it, tag it, and come back to it later. If you do this routinely, you will have a rich data set of inspiration to pull from that will only grow over time, and a lot of material for fueling innovation in your organizations. So the folks at PTT RNS have started the work of creating a taxonomy of mobile patterns. And of course, Google's material design spec and Apple's human interface guidelines lay out their own platform-specific takes on pattern libraries. These are fantastic resources that we should all rely on, that I rely on all the time. But I would encourage all of us to think of them as starting points, to be followed when appropriate and interrogated when appropriate, not Bibles to be followed to the letter, even when designing specifically for native Android and native iOS. It is so important to keep thinking critically about the interactions we use in our discipline and to keep pushing those forward. Apple and Google are not listening intently to your users around your product specifically. You are. And a design public questioning the aesthetic and interaction decisions of the largest tech companies is also healthy for those large tech companies. So if you're an artist breaking into UX, leverage your existing skill set in your new space. If you're a recruiter or a product leader building a team, challenge your thinking about where good candidates come from and what kind of backgrounds they might have. Hire the wildcard, hire the weirdo, hire the person who went to opera school. So that person has deep knowledge in another area and maybe a huge eagerness to learn, and they can shed light on your product in ways you might not expect. If you're a UXer, trust that anything and everything you're struck by is fodder for the work. A UXer's interaction library could include pictures of hospital waiting rooms or an on-duty bartender's t-shirt with directions to the restaurant's bathroom printed on the back so people don't have to ask in the middle of a busy service. We're not just talking about screens here. Think broadly about interactions and systems and why they work or don't work. Let yourself be fueled by your everyday lived experience. Document it, classify it, tag it, and come back to it. Circos and raw graphs are great resources for building circular visualizations from tabular data that would otherwise live in spreadsheets. Raw graphs is a bit more user-friendly, and Circos has its roots in genetics. Visualizations can also be built manually in Illustrator, which allows for more customization and authorship. I rely heavily on Google Drive, Google Photos, and screenshots for the routine upkeep of my archives, but I definitely recommend these tools. Thank you so much for your audience tonight. Does anyone have questions about what I've presented?
In your archive, there's a wide array of categories, and I just wanted to ask, how do you come up with the categories? Is it a process of collecting images until a category becomes clear, or do you have in mind certain categories archetypally and then fit images into them? Or is it a mixture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what happens at the beginning of thinking about a new area of interest is that I'm just absorbing a lot of things. I'm not trying to categorize anything at that point. It's just a lot of eating, just sort of go on a binge, like internet binge, and just take tons of stuff in. If I know I want to make a work about, say a product I built in the last few years was a children's on-demand lunch delivery service. So I built out the product universe for that. So obviously I became very interested in all of the things that have to do with on-demand food delivery and what it means to run a home and the day-to-day lives of young kids and their parents. So I just started gathering lots of images related to that. and some of them were sort of off in left field, and then the categories come later. Like after I have a lot of images that have sort of built up and like my desktop is a mess and I need to find some way to like make sense of them and understand what they are, then that's when the archiving starts to happen. So there's like a period of just kind of wild gathering at first. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Paige, can you share a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So I spent the first 10 years of my career as a visual artist. I studied studio art in undergrad and then got an MFA in painting after that. And taught, like worked in the art world, worked in museums, taught in universities, did all the things that any artists in the audience tonight? I thought I heard one. Oh, look at that. Nice showing. Awesome. So you guys know what it means to be an artist as a career. So that's what I did before getting into product. I see a hand.
Hi, thanks for sharing your method of archiving and sorting out patterns. It's really helpful. I was just curious for the part where you show the graphs.
Mm-hmm.
What are you using Google Drive or Google Photos for that, or how did you?
The part where I use the graph, you mean the circular visualization?
Right.
I built that layer by layer in Illustrator.
Oh.
I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. That was a drawing that I made, but there's also an argument for that's a time-consuming method, right? That's like the method of somebody who is a maker, as those of you who are in the audience know, that may be a method that makes sense in some contexts and maybe it doesn't make sense in other contexts. So raw graphs is a great resource for those of us who maybe are in a bit more of a time crunch and want to just get something out of the box that we can load data into and then just kind of send out. It's also great for that, and you can like change the hex colors, and there is some ability to customize, which is really nice. So I'd recommend taking a look at that.
That's a really nice presentation. The question, you mentioned Google and Apple in passing. Mm-hmm. What aspects of their design philosophy do you see points where maybe they could do something different or something that could be more functional?
Yeah, to be clear, I think Apple and Google are actually doing a great job at being Apple and Google for the most part. I think the responsibility when a company has that much power falls on the people who use it every day, right? And so as designers, very few designers actually work at Google designing the Google material design specs. So as the larger community of designers, it's important for us to not, there's nothing wrong with that spec, right? The error lies in how it's used, right? So just taking it sort of, like I'm in a rush, I'm on a deadline, like I know this will work, like okay, but how many times do we do that before it becomes a dead document? And I think that like these companies sort of need us to push back and say, well, I'm noticing that if we move this button or if we change the system in this way, like this is really helpful for people. And it's our responsibility to give back to that dialogue. Does that make sense? Okay. Any?
I just wanted to ask your thoughts. Something that I thought was very interesting was when you were talking about the difference between art and design. And when you're designing product, right, what you try and do, you're trying to make sure that the person has to think as little as possible. Like you said, it's as natural to me as, the new, iPhone X, you swipe it up and it's that little bit of reducing friction that changes the entire user experience. Whereas with art, right, you put something on the wall and people go to museums and they sit there for 30 minutes and they're like, what does this mean? And it's the complete opposite. You put out your art and they have to try and figure it out. You're making them learn. And kind of going, what do you just think about that, the fusion of them, the difference between them, and like what that means for the future? Because I think we want people to learn and people enjoy learning. And sometimes this frictionless idea, it's so simple, but you also don't have to think, and we humans find reward in thinking. So I just wanted to maybe hear your thoughts in that regard.
I think that's a very astute observation, is it not? I think it's a great question. I mean, so Are you an interaction designer? What's your background?
Colorful.
That's amazing. You're talking to one. Probably a room full of us, maybe? A few of us.
Music, art.
Great. So, yeah, I feel like the question of when, I think it becomes about reward, right? So I think an expectation. So when a viewer walks into a museum, they expect to put on their thinking cap and have to work a little, right? And somebody who is trying to quickly meet a need for healthcare or like sign up for apartment insurance or order food, like don't ask someone to learn a new interaction pattern if they're already hungry and they're going online to order food via an app. It's just not going to end well. So I think there are certain products where like you probably have a little bit more leeway, right? Like maybe a product that's more educational or more exploratory. Maybe a product that is geared towards learning already. Like maybe users will be primed to have to work a little bit harder, or if they can understand that there is if you can present before you're asking the person to do extra work, if you can present a reason why it's in their best interest and what the reward is, then you can maybe get them to buy in. But I think, yeah, it's a great question. I think that there is a little bit of a danger in putting ourselves to sleep as users, and like, where do we go from here? If we've like reduced everything down to this frictionless sort of set of archetypes, what happens when the world changes and we need different responses, So it's good to stay flexible. Yeah.
Hi there. Yes, that's a good point. It kind of sounds like maybe the access to the interface is straightforward, but then if the product itself is challenging, then that's where the mind can kind of possibly expand. But my question was, in your information gathering, so to speak, how much client input is taken into account when it comes to gathering everything you need to kind of like start formulating? And like for instance, with the project you mentioned you worked on recently, before you start your process of gathering and putting something together, how much client information as far as their influence in the design is taken into account?
Well, I think good design process always involves stakeholder research and ideally user research before anything is built, right? So I think the standard best practices apply. I think, and then part of that research is the design process, right? And staying critical of the kinds of patterns we're using and pinning those to our findings, right? The research is actually a very rich resource for figuring out what the interaction patterns should be, if indeed they should be changed and not follow the standard convention for whatever it is that the app is tasking the user through. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Good.
So I also come from an art background. I went to school for sculpture and then eventually found my way to product design. I'm a digital product designer. And just like as my day-to-day job right now, sometimes I'm working on like 100 screens at a time, and a lot of them are form fields, and it's just like, it's really bogging me down. So one thing that the whole brutalism concept that's coming around with web design right now, and you don't see it very often, but I find it super refreshing. It's like this break from everything where you just get to look at something which is really screwed up, and like one thing, someone I noticed doing it was the Huffington Post has the High Line, and they have these really cool stories, and they put a lot of work into their digital design. They use some brutalism, and it's like, thank God for this break, because do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts about brutalism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, this is a perfect example of designers getting together and saying, let's try this other thing because there's way too much color or
not enough color. Just like form fields after form fields.
Oh,
like
I see what you're saying.
Make this all make sense. And then sometimes you look at a site like, if you ever read that article, What is Code, where everything's so crazy looking visually. It's just awesome to get away from making everything so logical.
Yeah. So in your view, what does brutalism contribute?
A release,
Mhm.
but we can't use it in my company.
Bummer.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Well, maybe you can find some other like-minded people here tonight. Are there any other brutalists in the audience? No? We have to convert a couple.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask you, we got to see kind of your folder structure of images that you used for your art practice, and I don't know what you're comfortable sharing, but I'd just be really curious to hear a little bit more about like kind of the actual experience that you have with those images in relation to the work that you make as an artist. Like what, if you have a picture of a foyer of a modernist building, could you give us an example of what role that might play in work that you actually like finish as visual work that you make?
Yeah. So how does the archive result? What is the process to getting to finished pieces? Or is that your question?
Yeah, just like that. The archive appeared to be a very important tool for you, and I just am curious for your specific practice how that ends up operating when you're working in the studio.
Well, some artists are really good at looking at things and drawing them. I'm not one of those artists. If you asked me to draw a portrait of you right now, I wouldn't. I mean, it might look like a human, but it wouldn't look like you, probably. So I'm more of a tracer and a stealer of patterns and textures and environments. So I'm culling these images for basically stuff I could steal, and so I might duplicate a pattern in a hanging wall sculpture, or I might digitally reproduce something that's from the archive and like blow it up into like sort of immersive scale, and then pair that next to a sculpture. But so like I have a folder full of images of Cheetos and like images of like fisherman sweaters, and I ended up making a sculpture that had Cheeto elbow patches on like a J. Crew fisherman sweater. I wish I had an image of it, but so sometimes these things can just like find their way together in like ways that I don't think they would if I wasn't constantly looking through these images and searching for like cross-pollination. So it's about finding ways they can relate and like looking for stuff I can like lift out and then use when I'm making an object. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Just curious about, actually, you said the path that took you from fine art to product.
Oh, yeah. So I think for me, it goes back to that question of what the end functionality of my work was. And I always wanted my work to be a little bit more problem solving, or a little bit more activist, or a little bit more like, my work was literally about like the unintended consequences of business growth and like what happens to humans in that, like who sort of get a little bit lost in that system. And you know, I found myself wanting to make very like activist painting and sculpture about this topic. And I mean, those of you who are in fine art practice know that like painting is good at encouraging people to contemplate, but it's not necessarily good at overhauling organizational systems, right? So I figured it was just a better and more effective tool for what I ultimately wanted to do. But is there something lost? Maybe, yeah. I guess I want to get what concrete steps you took. Oh, you're asking really literally. Okay, so yes, that is a great question, by the way. You know, it's taken a few years, and I'm finally getting some traction. But it was a long process. I think I had the realization in 2015 that I didn't want to be a career visual artist, that I wanted to be a UX designer. And then from there, you know, I had like almost no digital skills. I mean, I could like use email, and I like knew how to use Illustrator and stuff. But I had a lot of visual skills, which, as it turns out, were not the same thing. as being a good visual designer. So I had to be a quick study. I took a course through General Assembly in UX, and I took a design lab, visual design course. I think I took one other course in there somewhere. Anyway, I just took a bunch of classes online. And I went through my LinkedIn network of every single person I could find who was working as a designer from my alumni network, and took people to a lot of coffees and had many people sort of just and people were very generous and nice and amazing. And I had some people that didn't result in anything, but a lot of people were incredibly helpful. You'd be amazed how helpful people are. I'm sure you probably know. I mean, everyone in this room really helps each other, and we all help each other. It's how careers are built. But I guess I relied on people's their goodwill, and people went to bat for me, and I was lucky. And I managed to get some freelance work doing UX research, which is originally what I thought I wanted to completely focus on. And that didn't result in a full-time job, but eventually from there I worked on some independent projects, and then found a full-time role as a UX designer at an agency. So yeah, it's just time. Does that answer your question? Are you a UX designer or an artist, or?
I've been some interactions.
Yeah. Cool.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
There's one more in the back.
One more question.
You mentioned that you had a brief stint in UX research.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how you integrated your creative practice that you had prior to that and your interest in data into your UX. I imagine it probably was more qualitative experience that you had during that time.
Yeah, that is correct. This particular role was more qualitatively focused. I think the great thing about being a creative is that you can apply it to an object, or you can apply it to a system around that object, right? And so research has the potential, even though you're not making objects, you're not producing digital things, you're not a digital maker, you are potentially, your findings have the opportunity from a design thinking perspective to impact the structure of the organization, because you can justify the reasons for strategic changes, right? So thinking about design and creativity from a more systems level was how I kind of melded those worlds at that time in that role.
Okay,
thank you so much,
very
guys.
much,
You have amazing
Paige.
questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll be back here on April 3rd, and we're going to have it's a live taping of a podcast called Deciding by Data, and they will be interviewing the CEO and founder of Meetup, Scott Heiferman. So be on the lookout for that. We'll be posting that pretty shortly. You're welcome to stay and enjoy what's left of the pizza and drinks and network. So thank you, and see you in a few weeks.